The video I'm responding to was initially a very influential one. At the time, I was learning how to analyze and write stories from YouTubers, and Super Eyepatch Wolves were among my favorites. He was even a major factor in starting my channel because he said something along the lines of, "If you think there should be a video that doesn't yet exist, make that video yourself." Back then, I took every word I heard from analysts as facts and did not yet learn the levels of subjectivity and qualities of arguments. This video made me question how good Naruto was, and even made me want to avoid the flaws that it had in my own stories. But after his video on protagonists and One Piece, I realized that story analysts are just people with opinions, and not everything they say is objective. I chose this video to respond to because of how influential this creator and this video was in the fandom. I'm not sure if he sways public opinion or just repeats them, but it definitely felt like the former at the time. So by pointing out the errors in his argument, maybe others can wake up like me and realize that behind fancy editing is just a person with opinions. This will also be a mental exercise for my analytical abilities and hopefully entertaining. The first problem is an indirect argument. He says why he didn't make The Fall of Naruto is because its popularity didn't steeply drop off. If you watch The Fall of Bleach, he makes arguments that the story's actual content dropped off, causing its drop off in popularity. But popularity is not equal to quality, which is what he'll indirectly argue here in the future. The next problem is that he basically says that Naruto was character driven, while other stories like Yu-Gi-Oh!, One Piece, and Hikaru were plot driven. The whole character or plot driven argument is stupid. In most cases, I can categorize a story as both plot and character driven. It's extremely subjective. Furthermore, if it was objective, it'd be basically useless apart from categorization. What useful info can I get from knowing a story is either plot driven or character driven? Next is a questionable quote. The series was less focused on the idea of being a ninja as much as it was what being a ninja meant to its different characters. This sounds smart, but it's not even true. Naruto's characters go on ninja missions almost every arc and even had to take an exam to rank up. If that's not being a ninja, then what is? Only the first arc had anything remotely close to what he was saying. Zabuza believed ninjas were tools, Naruto believed that they were people. You can tell an argument is poor if I can flip it around. One Piece is less focused on being a pirate as much as it is about what it means to be a pirate to the different characters. Then I could support this by saying that pirates traditionally plunder, but the main characters save islands and get treasure as a reward. Luffy believes that being a pirate is being free, and that Pirate King is the freest man in the world. Next is that he essentially says that the message of Naruto is about hard work. This is a common misconception. Nearly every arc in Naruto has its own theme. Some of the themes still linger in the background past their introduction, but they almost never become the central theme again. Hard work is one of the themes in the Chunin exams. It is most prevalent in Naruto vs Neji, but versus Zabuza, Gaara, Sasuke, Pain, and so on are not about hard work. If anything, the most overarching theme in Naruto is about forgiveness. In several arcs, Naruto is seen forgiving the primary antagonist. He uses Naruto topping the charts during the tree climbing to support his point that Naruto and Sasuke's rivalry was one of the best parts of the story. But again, popularity does not equal quality. I actually agree with his endpoint, but I disagree with his arguments. This is just his opinion, but saying that many of the supporting casts are arguably more interesting than the main trio is pure nonsense in my opinion. The character arcs and backstories of these two have some of the best in manga. Earlier, he even said that he wasn't fond of Naruto or Sasuke, which just hints that his biases will leak through heavily in his arguments. I don't think he said anything like this in his One Piece or DBZ videos. Later, he says that Kubo's fatigue resulted in the downgrading of his character writing. That's just wrong. Even in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, the final arc of Bleach, Kubo was coming up with distinct and memorable personalities. Bazz-B, Ugram, Askin, As-Not, Babbietta, and even Yuha himself. And what about Byakuya, Kenpachi, Unohana, and Ichigo's character development? With this same sentence, he implied that Kubo's weakest trait was his character writing, because he said that the weakest trait is the one that decreases with stress. What is his definition of character writing, and who is he to say that it's Kubo's weakest trait so objectively? Then he says that Naruto's draftsmanship was its weakest trait, and that it decreased. I'll tackle that later. He continues by saying that Naruto had the weakest art of the big three, and chalks it up to the break that Kishimoto took. So in order for this point to make sense, he'd need to explain his strict grading system for what he considers good art, and if he wanted to make his point stronger, he could go through every chapter and show his grading for them, but instead, he makes vague comments. He says Naruto doesn't have the effortless natural quality and finesse of Bleach. A. What does that even mean? B. On screen, he shows an iconic and epic Bleach panel early in Bleach's story and compares it to a mediocre panel towards the final 100 chapters in Naruto. The comparison is completely biased. Then he says it doesn't have the eccentric energy and punch of One Piece, once again using a good looking panel from earlier in One Piece. Again, what did this sentence even mean? It's just a string of vague, subjective words that sounds fancy. And if you think I'm making up excuses, look at the pages he used again. Both Bleach and One Piece's pages are pages where there's no panels and the art takes up the whole page, but Naruto's page has 6 panels. Next, he compares old and new pages. Someone else has already pointed out in a video that here, the goal of each page is completely different. Specifically that the one he's calling low energy is supposed to be sad and melancholic. In short, he's ignoring context to make his point. Ironically, I agree with his end goal, but not how he got there. Earlier Naruto action scenes had more dynamic and kinetic poses and interesting camera angles, but later Naruto traded that in for more realistic anatomy and expressive faces. Usually, the more realistic a face is, the more emotions you can convey, and those emotions are higher. Just compare 14-year-old Goku frowning to Jotaro frowning. Then he says that Kishimoto's break from art was the first factor for his lesser art. First, his art wasn't lesser than his fellow mangaka, and second, if they somehow objectively were, there's no way that he could prove that this is the reason. It is possible to take a break from something and come back as good or even better. Additionally, who says that the progress the other two were making was even substantial? What if they started drawing later than Kishimoto overall and that allowed Kishi to take a gap? It's just pointless speculation. Next, he says that Kishimoto's lack of draftsmanship is why he needed to redesign the characters to make them easier to draw. I don't know if Kishimoto says this himself because he didn't quote him, but redesigning characters to make them simpler is not a sign of weak drawing ability. It is a decision based on speed. It's the same reason why he got rid of Naruto's goggles or Sasuke's Chunin exam outfit. Being able to draw fast doesn't equate to good drawing skills. One Piece and Bleach characters have much simpler designs, but yet he doesn't equate that to poor draftsmanship. I do agree that the part 2 redesigns were mostly worse than part 1, but everything else he said is nonsense. He takes a dig at Naruto for everyone wearing a flak jacket during the war, but not only does he ignore the context that they are in a war, but also ignores the fact that most groups in Bleach do the exact same thing from the start. Shinigami, Espada, and Quincy all wear very similar uniforms, but yet this isn't a minus towards Bleach's art. His next point is pure speculation, but also logically flawed. He compares early Naruto to late Naruto to the Boruto manga. The Boruto manga was drawn by the assistant and looks closer to late Naruto than early Naruto. Therefore, the assistant was doing most of the penciling in late Naruto. That's his logic. It's like he completely forgot about the existence of artists changing and developing their art styles. Naruto chapter 1 doesn't look like chapter 700 because Kishimoto's art style evolved. Boruto looks like late Naruto because the artist tried to mimic Kishimoto's style as much as he could. It's that simple. That's like if Araki had an assistant drawing a new manga, and I came to the conclusion that because the assistant's style more closely resembled Araki's current style compared to his old one, the assistant is doing most of the penciling in JoJo. And here, he says the stress affected the story. Quote, as the focus of the story shifted from a group of children learning to be ninja to a group of teenagers simply being ninja. End quote. This quote used to bother me. Because of the word simply and him saying that he enjoyed early Naruto, I believe he's implying that Naruto was more interesting when they were learning. I even asked him what Naruto should have done here instead to avoid it in my own writing. Now, I know that this is just him talking out of his ass. It's a no-brainer that characters would eventually stop learning to do a job and start doing that job as a professional, and there's nothing wrong with that. Next, he says a lot of the themes of growing up, hard work, and mastering your own potential fell away in favor of bloodline techniques, cumbersome and over-convoluted lore, and ever-ballooning cast of uninteresting characters. This sentence is bullshit. In part 2, Shikamaru has to mature when he loses Asuma, and Naruto has to do the same when he loses Jiraiya. Naruto has to grow internally, and you can see this in the way he interacts with Sasuke. At first, he's begging him to come home and partaking in self-loathing, but in the Kage Summit, he's extremely mature and pathetic and no longer begging. That's growing up. Naruto trains for Rasen Shuriken, Sage Mode, and Nine Tails Mode. That's working hard. Naruto eventually controls the Nine Tails and gets whole new forms. That's mastering your own potential. Now the second half. Bloodline techniques have always been a big part of Naruto. Haku, Sasuke, Neji, Hinata, Sakon, Ukon, and Kimimaro. Cumbersome and over-convoluted lore. I'd love to hear his definition for this, because I guarantee One Piece will fit into this box too. Didn't Sanji become royalty? Didn't Zoro's backstory just find a way to connect to Wano? Didn't Zoro get Conqueror's Haki, which is only reserved for supreme rulers, which so far have been D's and royalty? And finally, a ballooning cast of uninteresting characters. Has he seen One Piece? Does he know how many characters are in the Wano arc alone? And how many of them are interesting? Because I'd need a definition for that too. And then he shows Sai. Sai had a tragic backstory, character arc, and even progressed further when he met his reincarnated brother, and he's uninteresting? Again, I need metrics for what's uninteresting or not. He says that post-time skip focused more on Naruto and Sasuke, which I actually disagree with. There's not a single arc in Naruto that was not further developing the relationship between the two in part 1, and the final arc is the tipping point, culminating with a final battle between the two. Part 2 is simply about their individual journeys. If he finds them less interesting apart, that's his opinion, but splitting them up allowed them to have such amazing character arcs. Naruto would have never fallen so low if Sasuke hadn't left. Sasuke would have never been so vengeful if Naruto was around. I agree with his point about power escalation, but I didn't hear this in the One Piece video. He didn't talk about how Haki made One Piece all about power levels. Everyone practically needs Haki in order to be useful during battle, but I disagree with his line about side characters losing the ability to have significance in the overall story. Just look at the war. Kakashi and Guy are helping a powerful Naruto combat Obito with mostly close quarters combat. Hinata impacts the story with their words and character rather than power. Power is not the only way a character can impact the story. He says characters like Rock Lee and Sakura are left in the dust. Guy is a character like Lee, and he stole the show with his fight against Madara. Sakura fights against several monsters during the war and even helps in the fight against Kaguya. This is a bad argument. He then says that a lot of the charm was watching each character's unique approach to combat. Naruto was still doing that up until the end. Each Akatsuki, each Pain, each Kage, Kabuto, Obito, and even Madara all had unique fighting styles. He said that later encounters feel like giant mecha battles rather than the small-scale fights that were so compelling. I could bring up Kakashi vs Obito, but that fight is only good in the anime, so I'll bring up Obito vs Naruto, Kakashi, Guy, and B. And that was a small-scale fight with insane levels of strategy. Or what about Sasuke vs Danzo, or Naruto vs Pain? There are very few fights that are like mecha battles. So how much later in the story did mecha battles come in? There's only one fight in part 2 where both sides have an avatar, and that's the final one. Every other time, one side has an avatar and the other doesn't, so it's impossible that they'd feel like mecha battles. Next, he argues that by the Pain arc, both Naruto and Sasuke had reached their goals and the only logical thing would be to have them face off. This completely ignores everything else in the story. There are other themes and plot points to be explored. The Eternal Tsukuyomi has been hinted at several times. Obito disguised as Madara hadn't shown what he'd been planning. Yet the story should end? Then he argues that Naruto was drawn out because of his popularity, but he'd already admitted before that Kishimoto said he ended it on his own terms. Then he calls the war drawn out and bloated. Either he watched all the war filler, or he just had bad arguments and criteria, because the war was paced excellently. There are just enough fights in each phase to keep the momentum going. And once again, I don't think you'd hear him say that about One Piece, which has 1,000 chapters already. And as I analyzed in another video, the lengths of the arcs keep getting longer and the amount of characters per arc keeps expanding. Once again, he takes a dig at the lore of Naruto and says that the war was based on it rather than the characters. My head is starting to hurt trying to break this down. What are his standards for interesting lore, because I'd like to see how One Piece meets them. And then, the war is based on both characters and lore. Madara and Obito have personal reasons for starting the war, which is shown in their backstories. Naruto even had a philosophical battle with Obito, yet it's not based on characters. I agree with Kaguya not being interesting, but saying that Madara was not is ridiculous. He interviewed 40 people and used it as proof of the fanbase being turned off. Not only is that a terrible sample size, which was probably biased, but popularity doesn't equal quality. The Ninja War doesn't span over a third of the manga. I did the math in my part 1 versus part 2 video. I don't care about his criticism towards the anime. Those are things that the manga can't control. Quote, I think when you take all of this into account, it's easy to see why Naruto had its steady drop in popularity. End quote. Right there, he's equating his problems with the story's quality to the drop in popularity. You know what I'm about to say. Popularity doesn't equal quality. Now to defend Bleach. He said that things progressing is why Naruto didn't fall off as hard as Bleach. In case you didn't know, One Piece is a manga that is over 1,000 chapters in, and it's still about the crew trying to find the One Piece while going island to island and saving people. Bleach's lore at least changed drastically, especially with the introduction of the Quincy's. By that logic, One Piece should be the least popular. This argument is horrible. He then says that Bleach resets at the end of each arc. The first arc ended with Rukia captured, second ended with Aizen revealing he's a villain, third ended with Ichigo losing his powers, fourth ended with Ichigo gaining his powers, fifth ended with the hero saving the world. Super Eyepatch Wolf often says things with little support and either hopes the audience agrees or has never seen what he's talking about. And when he provides support, it ignores context or makes him a hypocrite for enjoying the same thing in another manga. I'll quickly show some hypocrisy and double standards in his Why You Should Watch One Piece video. This video was made during the Whole Cake Island arc. He says One Piece is still good and he thinks Whole Cake is one of the best. In his Bleach video, he criticized the story for feeling repetitive, but here, he doesn't even acknowledge Whole Cake's similarities to the superior Enies Lobby. Additionally, nearly every One Piece arc follows a similar formula, like Bleach, but this is conveniently not brought up. Whole Cake is also not considered bloated by him, despite being one of the longest arcs in the story, with 78 chapters, being the third longest so far. If you want to see how that compares to the earlier lengths of arcs, watch my part 1 versus part 2 video. He never brings up power escalation or how fights have devolved into battles based on hockey levels. Just the fact that he didn't name this the fall of or highs and lows prepares you for his bias. Here, he says One Piece is at heart a story about the Straw Hat Pirates, but in the Naruto video, he said One Piece is about adventuring and implied it was plot driven, but now he's implying it's character driven. In this video, one of his sections is spent gushing over the world building and setting. Maybe it's because this video is structured more like a review while the others were critiques, but he never spent that much time gushing over a small detail in the other two videos. Some of these praises could even be awarded to the others. He praises the story for short-term and long-term storytelling, when this is a basic skill that most use. For this manga, he's able to take context into account when talking about the art, justifying several things that the art is criticized for, but he couldn't seem to do the same for Naruto. I could easily argue that the cartoony anatomy makes the characters and events harder to take seriously, but he says that this makes his art striking and unique. He also complements the exaggerated expressions with fancy words, but I could easily say that they look goofy and detract from the scene, especially the exaggerated crying. An example would be when Ace died. Luffy looked too silly. Here's more of his clever excuses. He says Oda's pages are dense with visual data instead of saying that there's too much going on and are unpleasant to look at. Cramming visual information into a page is somehow a good thing, but he barely mentions how cluttered they are, even though that's often the result. He then discusses sequential events as if it isn't a thing that nearly every comic artist does. After some more empty compliments, he says the simple act of reading One Piece feels good. This hasn't been true since the time skip. Of course, that's my opinion and I explain it well in my part 1 versus part 2 video. But it's evident that Super Eyepatch Wolf spins almost everything about the manga into a praise, and that these praises could be awarded to other manga, but are intentionally not. Naruto had revolutionary panel flow in the final fight of part 1, but that was conveniently left out. He goes into detail and gushes about the lore and planning, but never explains why he didn't like Naruto's lore. Someone has already broken down his bad character progression argument, but once again, he's finding a way to defend against common criticisms towards the story, even if it means making up stuff. I'm not going to go through the whole video, but I believe I've pointed out the hypocrisies and bad arguments that he used to make these videos. My problem isn't that he has a different opinion than me, it's the logic he used to get there. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, and check out my manga for free online. If you enjoy my content, please consider donating to my Patreon. All important links will be in the description.